Public session. And before I begin, can I remind members and witnesses and those in the public area to make sure their mobile phones are completely turned off, please, as they interfere with the system here in the meeting room. Just to remind members, today we're dealing and witnesses, we're dealing directly again with the issue of Brexit. About 2 years ago, approximately 2 years ago, we published a report ourselves in this committee on the impact or potential impact of Brexit on the agricultural sector. And I suppose, to say the least, we found that there was no particularly good news in that regard. And as a result of I suppose, ongoing negotiations over the past number of weeks and months, we decided to update where things are at the moment from an agriculture point of view, and we decided to obviously bring in those who were directly involved with that particular sector, as in the Export Association and Irish Chamber, and today we're delighted to have you here before us today. I'd like to welcome from the Irish Export Association Mr Simon McKeever, Chief Executive, and Mr Pascal Coyne, Communications and Public Affairs Manager of the British Irish Chamber of Commerce, Ms Marie Gallagher, Chair of the Agri-Food Committee, and Mr Paul Lynham, Head of Sectoral Policy, and thank them for the committee today to discuss the impact of Brexit on the agri-food sector and trade. I'd like to also thank you very much for your submissions that you made in advance of the meeting today. Before we begin, I just want to bring your attention. Witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed to only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice, the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against a person or entity by name in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice, the effect that members should not comment on or criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Now, Mr McKeever, I'll ask you to make your opening statement, please, and then we'll ask Ms Gallagher for her statement, and then we'll take questions from the members. Mr McKeever, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, and thanks for the re-invitation to come back. And I can assure you that not an awful lot has got better since we were last in front of you. I'm not proposing to read the first page of my submission. It's just kind of general introductory remarks. So I'm going to start from the middle of page 2 of our submission. The Irish Exporters Association welcomed the Joint Committee on Agriculture, Food and Marine's invitation to contribute, and thank you very much for having us here today. We've taken note of the various challenges and recommendations it addresses in your publication for the European Union, Ireland-UK relations, as well as trade, competition and other sector-specific policies. In particular, we welcome the report's acknowledgement of the various challenges and risks Brexit presents to Irish businesses through likely reductions in exports to the UK and increased competition with UK exporters in other markets, including our own market, it must be said as well here, particularly if the pound stays the way where it is at the moment, as well as the potentially negative impacts of the reintroduction of tariffs and customs. Since the publication of the Joint Committee's report in February 2017, negotiations of the United Kingdom's withdrawal had successfully reached sufficient progress this time last year in December 2017 and the publication of the draft withdrawal agreement in February 2018. Although, according to EU Chief Negotiator Michel Barnier, between 90 and 95% of the withdrawal agreement is finalised, key differences surrounding the Republic of Ireland-Northern Ireland border, the Good Friday Agreement and protected geographical indicators continue to hold up negotiations. So just to mention that I will draw, as I go through our submission, on an ongoing piece of research that we do, which is our Export Eye survey, which we've updated to include some new bits and pieces in it. So we have some old, we've been running this survey for the last couple of years, so we have some early indications of what people are saying, and that we thought it would be very useful to bring that in here today. Just to mention the recommendations of other parliamentary reports on agriculture, food and the marine, including the report of the Shannon Special Committee. We take note of them, and we take note of the Shannon Special Select Committee on withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union's June 2017 report on Brexit implications and the potential solutions. In particular, the IEA welcomes the report's detailed analyses of the potential impacts and responding solutions needed to address the different potential post-Brexit scenarios for an Ireland-UK trading relationship. Okay, so then I suppose to get into the meat of what we wanted to tell you today. So preparations and preparedness for Brexit and the current status of negotiations, including any agreement on the future EU-UK relationship. So while an increasing number of Irish exporters across the varying business sectors are stepping up their Brexit preparedness, a still large number of IEA members do not have either preparedness or mitigation plans in place. This, by and large, is due to the largely complex and influx nature of the ongoing negotiations on the UK withdrawal agreement. IEA members continue to state their concern about the large number of unknown unknowns and the difficulty to understand how or what to prepare for. In any case, with the assistance of ourselves and others, member and non-member businesses have already undertaken significant steps to diversify the export markets and to train and educate their respective staff on the customs and other procedures. According to initial responses from the IEA's ongoing Brexit and impact on your business survey, 9 in 10 IEA members who responded to the question are somewhat aware of the implications of a soft or hard Brexit scenario on their business operations. Almost 75% of initial responses state that they are very aware of the state of play in the ongoing Brexit negotiations. I suppose the converse of that, it could be said that 25% are somewhat in the dark about it as well, which is a little bit worrying. In general, the IEA members have put in place Brexit mitigation measures, with preliminary results of our survey indicating that of those that have responded to this question, all had decided to put in place at least one Brexit mitigation measure. However, at the same time, only slightly more than half of all respondents indicated that they have a formal or non-formal impact mitigation plan in place. Of those members with a mitigation plan in place, the deadline for implementation is between January and March 2019. Anecdotally, just to say to you, many of our companies have done how much is this going to cost, and are sitting with their finger on the button. And I was talking to one company recently that have actually decided to actually spend the money that they're going to do on it. But by and large, they're not. They're sitting there waiting with the finger on the buzzer to see, do we implement this or not. Plans are predominantly designed around a no-deal scenario for a 6-month period. And I think that that's particularly concerning for us, and I'm going off the script for a second, and it's because anecdotally very recently at a roundtable that we had with a number of our members, a group of them are telling us they have these mitigation plans in place, but the measures that they've taken will only last for 6 months. That's particularly worrying.
Sorry for the question. I say just breaking news that EU and UK negotiators have agreed a text for the Irish border.
Great.
As we speak.
Okay.
So.
Good.
We'll see how that progresses over the next, obviously, days and hours and days. We will.
Phone works in your time, won't sure
the chair, certainly.
Okay, so this in spite of all respondents having actively engaged in scenario planning for at least one potential post-Brexit impact on their business, with most respondents having engaged in scenario planning for the potential reintroduction of tariffs, the potential reintroduction of customs checks, the routing of in or outbound goods, or the reintroduction of border controls. And you can see from the graph the type of things that people are doing there. Irish exporters, especially in the food sector and particularly for fresh and perishable goods, are heavily dependent on fast and frictionless access to the European continent via the UK land bridge, as a delay in transport time could cause their goods to go off. As a result, agriculture and food exporters continue to be extremely concerned about potential delays caused by potential customs and sanitary checks at exit and exit points to the Irish and UK ports. And when you look at the land bridge, it's not just the UK ports on the west of the UK, it's also the ones going into the continent as well. Such delays in transport times, especially for just-in-time deliveries for continental supermarkets, may have a detrimental impact in the competitiveness of the Irish agricultural, food and marine industry. In response, a number of IEA members are actively investigating transport and shipping alternatives to the continent, such as directly by sea. And you can see what measures people are using at the moment to get their goods off the island at the moment. Furthermore, both exporters and importers on both sides of the Irish Sea are increasingly looking at stockpiling goods to mitigate any potential impacts. This is placing further strain on the already limited availability of warehousing space. And as we're seeing this as an accelerating trend as we head in towards the end of the year. So, industries such as the pharma sector have a massive demand for warehousing space at the moment. Increasingly food has been, and now they're going, well, I need to stockpile goods both. So Irish companies are looking to stockpile goods both in Ireland and in the UK, and you have UK companies looking to do exactly the same thing. So there's a massive, massive demand on warehouse space at the moment. Okay, so market diversification. So this is one of the measures that companies are taking. Although the UK continues to be a key market for Irish exports, since the referendum in 2016, Irish exporters have increasingly looked to diversify their export markets to reduce their over-reliance on the UK market. In fact, in the IEA's January 2018 Export Eye, 66% of respondents stated their intention to diversify their business in the coming 6 months, up from 54% in June. These figures complement the figures released by the CEO on external trade for 2017, which show an increasingly outward and global-looking Irish export sector. In particular, the IEA is seeing a rising interest among members to enter and expand their business in Germany, the USA, France and Spain. In addition, Australia, the Netherlands, Canada, Belgium and Italy and Sweden make up the remaining top 10 diversification destinations. So what's dark from this for us is that the top 10 diversification markets that companies are looking at are all either very close or they speak English. And we see, you know, when we get asked for help, we get a lot of questions about the USA. We get a lot of, there's a huge interest in Canada, massive interest in Canada at the moment, at the USA, and the early indications from our survey, that is probably have about half the respondents in, is the USA is number one now again. But you can see the other markets, like China at 10%, you can see the other markets that are a little further away are a bit down the pecking order in where companies are looking at. In addition, Irish exporters are increasingly shifting their focus on emerging markets in China, South Korea and Saudi Arabia. The impact of post-Brexit trade policy. The United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union is expected to have a number of potential impacts on Ireland's international competitiveness. This is mirrored by a general sentiment among IEA members that Brexit will have a harmful effect on the Irish economy, competitiveness and export sector. The UK has long been a strong advocate for a liberal European trading policy. With the UK's departure from the EU, the influence of the liberal trading countries may potentially be diminished. I think that's a particularly big issue, leading towards a more conservative, protectionist EU international trade policy. In any case, the Irish Exporters Association welcomes the recently finalised free trade and investment agreements with Japan, Vietnam and Singapore, as well as those currently under negotiation by the EU, with high potential export markets such as Australia, Indonesia and the Mercosur bloc, as well as New Zealand. We welcome the strong focus across all FTA agreements on reducing barriers to trade, increasing market access and supporting European business and regions through enforcing protected GIs such as Irish whisky, Irish cream or Clare Island salmon. But one of the things that we've noticed amongst European companies, and particularly amongst Irish companies, and I'd say nationally, is that when the EU does an FTA with another country, the other country takes a lot more advantage. It seems to be much more aware and better getting the information out. And so therefore EU countries, the EU and Ireland, doesn't get as big an advantage out of that because it's not, I think it may be a lack of awareness or whatever it may be, but they're not getting as much as they could be out of that. The United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union also has global trading implications from the bilateral relationship between the EU and the UK, in particular with respect to the EU's WTO tariff rate quotas, and you might have noticed that this row was brewed up over the last couple of weeks, for agricultural, fish and industrial goods. In consideration of the UK's withdrawal, a revised EU TRQ schedule will have to be negotiated by the European Commission on behalf of the EU member states. In view of the need to ensure legal certainty for businesses and the continuous smooth operation of imports under the tariff rate quotas to the Union, we welcome the Commission's decision to proceed unilaterally to the appointment of revised tariff rate quotas. In particular, this will ensure that the EU, including Ireland, continues to have a high level of quotas when trading internationally in agricultural and fisheries goods after the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. We note, however, with concern recent reports on the blocking of the UK's proposed draft TRQ schedules by a number of WTO members, including the US, China, Australia and New Zealand, under a disorderly Brexit scenario where the default WTO trading terms by the UK, the absence of an agreed schedule may significantly impede Irish companies' ability to trade into the UK, and therein lies the nub of: do you reverse the WTO tariffs, or what way do you revert in the event of a crash out? The impact of market diversification inside and outside the European Union. Overall, when investigating new markets, Irish exporters appear to show a clear preference for European Union member states and English language countries. With respect to the agriculture, food and fishery sectors, Ireland's close proximity to the European continent and associated short transport and shipping times are a significant factor for the popularity of the European Union as the predominant export diversification destination. Moreover, the cost reductions achieved through the common standards, rules and regulations provided through the EU single market, and the absence of customs and tariffs on intra-EU trade is frequently cited as a key factor for targeting EU member states when diversifying their export markets. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Keever. Ms. Gallagher now will take your statement, please.
Okay, and thank you to the Chair and to the Committee for inviting the British Irish Chamber of Commerce to address you today on the basis of our submission. My name is Marie Gallagher. I chair the Agri-Food Committee at the British Irish Chamber. I am a food lawyer on my day job, and I chair the committee. I'm joined today in this session by my colleague Paul Lynham, who is Head of Sectoral Policy at the Chamber and Access Secretariat to the Committee. So I think at the outset, before I get into to my comments, and thank you for updating us on that, Chair, and very much on behalf of the British Irish Chamber, we would certainly welcome an announcement that there has been agreed form of wording on the Irish border, and look forward to finding out a little bit more detail of that, because as Simon has already referred to, and as we will be talking about, the issue of the border and cross-border trade is of course of huge significance to our members, both in Ireland and in the UK. For those of you who don't know us, the British Irish Chamber of Commerce is the only organisation representing business activities with interests across the two islands. Our raison d'etre is to champion, protect and grow the trade between the UK and Ireland. And that trade is, as you know, worth in excess of 65 billion a year, and it sustains over 400,000 jobs, which are evenly spread across Britain and Ireland. In addition to Brexit, the Chamber operates across 9 policy strands, including the agri-food sector, through its policy committee. This committee is focused on maintaining and protecting the critically important UK-Ireland agri-food trade, which evidently faces a clear and present danger as a consequence of the Brexit vote. Members of this committee include household names such as ABP, Borbia, Dawn Farms, Diageo, Greencore, Fifes and Tesco. We have a very broad membership of companies affected and who are very active with the committee. I do not need to remind you here at the committee of the importance of this trade to the sector or to the Irish economy as a whole, and the potential damage that tariffs, non-tariff barriers or disruption to the all-island sector would cause. Your 2017 report covers all of these facts in detail. My presentation today will focus on our recent submission, notably looking at challenges for the European Union, the current state of negotiations, responding to the Brexit challenge and the Chamber's recommendations. So first, to turn to the challenges for the EU as we see it. While Brexit sent an initial shockwave through the European Union, anti-EU sentiment has not spread to Ireland as many had initially feared. Despite the well-publicised Oireachtas conference last year, Ireland has maintained one of the highest satisfaction ratings in the EU, consistently polling over 90%. For many EU states, Brexit is not the all-consuming issue that it is in Ireland. With the migration crisis, the economic difficulties of some Mediterranean states, the tensions with Russia and the standoff with Orban in Hungary all taking various levels of prominence across the continent. That being said, the EU has been steadfast in its support for Ireland and the Irish backstop. This position has been reiterated to the Chamber in its numerous meetings across Europe. It is a public show of solidarity that is reciprocated with the Irish public's support for membership of the EU. The Chamber's view has always been that Ireland's future lies in the heart of Europe, while maintaining the closest possible relationship to Ireland's most important trading partner, the UK. As a country, we don't need to define ourselves in terms of our relationship with anyone else, whether that is the UK, the US or the EU. We must, however, remain vigilant to ensure that we manage and contribute positively to these distinct and mutually beneficial relationships that we currently enjoy. As a Chamber, that is what we have been striving to do in our ongoing work across the Irish Sea with our UK members and our wider UK network. Looking to the current state of negotiations, as the Brexit negotiations continue, we as a Chamber are extremely concerned that greater progress has not been achieved in these talks. We had hoped for a breakthrough by the October summit of the European Council, but unfortunately this did not materialise. Of course, developments today may have in fact changed this since I put together these notes, but certainly as and from this morning, an emergency summit in November is now looking unlikely, meaning that the European Council summit in December will likely be the final opportunity to secure a deal. The Chamber has consistently warned of the dangers of a no-deal Brexit and of the importance of delivering a transition period to provide adequate time for businesses to prepare for any new arrangements. The Chamber shares the view of this committee. If an extension to Article 50 is needed to ensure a mutually beneficial agreement is reached between the UK and the EU, then the UK should request it and EU 27 should consent to it. A no-deal outcome would be wholly unsatisfactory to businesses who would face the prospect of severely disrupted supply chains, new barriers to trade and significant cost increases that will impact on growth and jobs. While we believe that a deal preventing the UK crashing out of the EU remains possible, we are advising our members to intensify their preparations for a no-deal scenario and are providing them with the relevant information to help them to do so. Responding to the Brexit challenge, as outlined in our submission to the committee, the Chamber understands the need to diversify our markets to expand the reach of Irish agri-food products. Many of our members already export throughout Europe and beyond, and as this committee knows, our reliance on the UK as an export market has steadily fallen to 35%. However, we reiterate our caution that diversification cannot be seen as a panacea to Brexit. The UK market not only shares similar tastes to the Irish market, as well as language, law and culture, but Irish companies have invested considerable resources and time in gaining a foothold in the UK market that cannot be easily replicated in a European or external market. Regardless of the outcome of the negotiations, the UK will remain an important market for Irish agri-food exports. Thus, protecting Ireland's market share in the UK is essential for the sector. In this regard, the Chamber wishes to acknowledge the work of state agencies in preparing for Brexit, notably for the agri-food sector, where Board BIA has actively engaged with its clients in the sector by providing supply chain workshops, customs training and currency risk training, as well as ongoing engagement and support. We have also found that the Board BIA Brexit Barometer has been a useful tool for the sector in gauging the preparedness of the sector for Brexit. For the Chamber's part, we held a major conference in September which brought together key stakeholders from across the sector, including Minister Creed and Tara McCarthy from Board BIA, Patrick Coveney from Greencore, Pamela Byrne, the CEO of the FSAI, amongst others. In addition, we have developed a Brexit toolkit, hosted regular briefings for our members and liaised directly with the UK authorities. From our interactions with our agri-food members, we can inform the committee that the vast majority of the larger companies are taking the necessary steps within their power to prepare for Brexit. But the lack of clarity and certainty as to what Brexit will mean still poses considerable problems for businesses, and particularly for smaller businesses. So, moving to the Chamber's recommendations. Regardless of the preparations that Irish agribusiness can make, the UK leaving the EU will have a significant impact on the sector. This impact will likely be catastrophic if there is a no-deal, disorderly Brexit. Extracting the pertinent points from the Chamber's policy papers, we make the following recommendations for the consideration of this committee. Advocate to the European Commission for the establishment of a Brexit mitigation fund in conjunction with temporary relaxation of state aid rules in sectors and regions most acutely impacted by Brexit. The Chamber has seen firsthand that the work of state agencies such as Bord Bia, Enterprise Ireland and the Food Safety Authority in preparing their clients not just for the threats associated with Brexit, but also assisting them to identify new opportunities that have been emerging. To its credit, since the Brexit referendum results, the Government has broadly increased the budget of state agencies in addition to Brexit-specific initiatives. This must be maintained. In addition, government supports should be simplified. The Government should work with business representative organisations such as the Chamber and the Irish Exporters Association to review the grant process from the application phase to reimbursement. State supports should be open to all businesses exposed to the UK market, and the business and stakeholder organisations should be fully mobilised to ensure that businesses are aware of their eligibility for support. We also recommend that export certificates for agri-food exporters are simplified. As it currently stands, the export system, which is administered by the HSE for food products of non-animal origin, is inefficient and is frustrating exporters, which is leading to delays in exports. This is particularly relevant for agri-food exporters seeking new market access. A more streamlined system should be put in place to ensure that exporters are fully supported in their endeavours and are not hindered by red tape. We've also recommended the introduction of a customs voucher scheme. To alleviate this burden, the Government should introduce a simplified customs voucher scheme offering up to €5,000 support to Irish companies which export to and import from the UK and who will be working with customs procedures, possibly for the first time. We also recommend an increase in support for the regulatory enforcement agencies in Ireland, specifically the FSAI. Ireland's official controls of food are going to be under increased scrutiny and are going to be severely stretched in a post-Brexit world, regardless of the type of Brexit. Ensuring we have a robust independent regulator capable of monitoring the safety, quality and origin of food produced in Ireland, food destined for export and, more importantly, imported food will be key to Ireland's future ability to market itself as the food island. The Chamber has lobbied for the introduction of a loan scheme similar to the Future Growth Loan Scheme, and therefore we welcomed the Minister's announcement in Budget 2019. The view of Chamber members is that the interest rate applied should be 2.95%, the rate applied to the previous agribusiness loan scheme. Thank you for your attention. I welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Ms Gallagher and Mr McKeever likewise. Now we'll take questions from the members. We'll start with Senator Lombard. We'll work around this way. We'll take all the questions together if that's okay. Then we come back to yourselves.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Lombard, first of all, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd congratulate the witnesses on their presentation, and it's amazing how things could move on. You started the presentation, there was no movement, now there's significant movement, so we could be out of date before we leave the room itself. I suppose it is the topic of concern for businesses and communities for the last 2.5 years where Brexit was going to go. And maybe today we might get some clarity in particular about the border issue, which is one of the really significant issues. So I'm a bit like yourselves, I'm waiting for the detail, and when we have that we'll probably be better informed. But as a business community, how prepared are we for what Brexit could bring? I take into consideration that the Minister for Foreign Affairs had basically 4 major events throughout the country in the last month, significant interaction with the business community, many stakeholders involved. I think they were very well attended. On that point of view, do you feel the actual business community have interacted enough regarding the actual fear of what Brexit can bring? Have they worked with their own businesses regarding those issues? And also the Brexit loan that was spoken about, the €300 million loan, do you think there's been an engagement with the actual business community on that loan itself? And have they engaged with the process about bringing forward proposals so they can draw down that funding? And regarding the UK side, do you think that readiness has been made available on the UK? Do you think the UK have put programmes in place to inform their businesses, to inform their society? maybe in financial supports? Have they put anything like that in place, like we've seen in Ireland in the last 6 or 8 months? Because where I've been looking, I've seen, maybe it's my polarised view, an interaction to some degree with the government, with the business community, and there seems to be a denial on the other side of the water regarding issues. So maybe comments about how prepared would be our neighbours if there was such an issue about a hard border, because even though there is a text somewhat agreed today, there's the political issues that have to be played through in Westminster, which probably are going to be more problematic than the actual text itself. So I just want your views regarding, in many ways, how prepared are us regarding the interaction we've had, but in particular on the UK side. Are they ready? Have they put information out there? Have they put loans out there? And have they engaged with their communities? If I could leave it at that.
Senator Daly, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just briefly, and again, Senator Lombard just hit on it. I suppose it's good news, breaking news, but you know, it's only a text that we're not aware of yet, and we all know, I think, the way the thing has been evolving, that the problem is probably going to be getting that text through on the British side, and you know, without fear of contradiction, like their whole dealing of the negotiations at the very top level has been totally in disarray. Has that been portrayed down through the channels to their SMEs and their export companies that you're aware of? Or, you know, we have showed, we've at least had a discussion about preparedness. While every company may not have taken up, you know, the advice or acted on the advice they were given, we've had the discussion, we've had the conversation. Have they even done that? Are there a lot of the companies, and I know it probably wouldn't concern the exporters as much, but from the British-Irish side, you know, that we're dependent on, maybe companies that Irish companies are dependent on for raw materials or for products that, you know, are in denial of this. And if what has been agreed or whatever has been agreed today is not accepted on the UK side, and we do end up still with a hard Brexit, are there Irish companies going to find themselves in precarious situations that aren't even maybe aware of that, by virtue of the fact that some of their raw materials or some of the necessary input products are coming from or through the UK? And again, while it may not be in either of your briefs, how aware are you of contingency plans on the continent and in countries that are exporting to Ireland, that we are importing from, but are using the land bridge, as we call it, in reverse? And I suppose to follow that through a step further, have we explored or are we looking at potential positives? I know that the negatives far outweigh the positives, but if even with tariffs, could we in certain instances with certain products or goods, even with a tariff, be more competitive than a fellow EU country who has not only the tariff but to transport the product that extra distance or the farther distance that they are away from the UK market than we are? You know, somebody down from the boat end of Italy bringing a product to the UK, would there be a potential new market for us maybe in that scenario when they take their transport costs and their tariffs into consideration? Could we then actually become competitive? And finally, just, it's right to plan. We have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But in your own opinions, like we're talking mainly here from the agriculture side and the agri-food side, on the 1st of April next year, even if it is a cliff-edge Brexit, the people in the UK are still going to need to eat, they're still going to need food, so how do you see that problem being overcome from their side? You know, and will we by default end up almost in a humanitarian effort to keep them from going hungry benefit in some way? Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Deputy Kenny, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank both of you for your contributions today. It's been very useful. In regard to the export, and I just wondered about the issue of the land bridge as well, going across the UK to continental Europe, where a lot of our product travels across that. Is there any arrangement or any model for an arrangement been put in place that product that's leaving Ireland and going on to Europe won't have to go through checks? That if they're in, I suppose, sealed containers with the various what do we call those, the codes on them that they can't break? Is there some system in place that won't happen, that they can go straight through and can pass through quickly? And likewise vice versa the other direction. As you've pointed out, a large amount of the product that particularly goes to the Netherlands and Belgium is ongoing to other places around the world. And similarly, in regard to that, will there be a situation that we won't have to go through any checks, that we can just, that regardless of what happens, we can fly through, or is there any negotiations around that? From an exporter's point of view, and the point was made by my colleague that you know, people in Britain are obviously going to have to eat, and they're obviously going to have an awful lot of other products that they get from Ireland, which they haven't been getting somewhere else up to now. And when we talk to even to people here in Board B and to various trade missions that various ministers lead all over the world, where we're trying to export stuff to other countries and trying to do deals with other countries, etc., we know it takes quite a length of time. It's not something that happens in an instant. And in that context, do we have any information as to what's happening in Britain? Are they now out actively trying to do these deals elsewhere? Have they any of them done? Have they any of them done? Have they even started doing any of them? And in that context, does it leave us in a position where whatever product they're getting from Ireland today, in a year's time, will they still need to be getting that product, regardless of what deal or non-deal or whatever happens, that we're going to be in a situation where we have to try and move on with it. In relation to the number of issues that you outlined in regard to particularly the Brexit mitigation fund and a relaxation of state aid rules, I think most of us would concur that we need to see something like that happen. And I think that probably for some time now, it's been acknowledged that something will need to kick in and around that. And I expect that what we have is a situation where people are waiting to see what the outcome of the negotiations are going to be, what is the impact going to be, and then put it in place. But it's clear that probably the place that fund needs to come from is from Europe. And therefore, do you or are you aware of any progress that has been made in that direction, or where we're at in regard to that? Also, in regard to the issue of the customs voucher scheme and companies who will have to all of a sudden start dealing with customs that hadn't done so before, what level of complications are there? Is it a very difficult process to start? How difficult is it for a company who hasn't had any of those issues in the past, and what kind of taxing process will it be on them? Finally, I think it's good news what we hear about, that there is wording of some kind possibly agreed, or at least up for agreement. The Irish border issue, and I live in a constituency on the border, I live in Leitrim, and I'm really conscious of what's happening there, particularly with agricultural products that pass over and back across the border all of the time. And in truth, regardless of what agreement is made, it is impossible to, if you're going to have a situation where you have people living within fields of each other and roads crossing up and down, like I think there's it was pointed out by a Labour minister some months ago, that there's more roads between Monaghan and Armagh than there are between Sweden and Norway. You know, just that simple reality has to kick in at some point. And I wonder, is that reality at home with the colleagues that you have, particularly in the UK and the other businesses there? Are they aware, you know, that this is an impossible circle to square? Thank you, Chair.
We'll start with Mr. McKeever.
Sure, thank you, Chair. I have this magic phone that's able to get around the airplane mode as well, and I gather there's...
You broke the sequence of the code.
I did, yeah. So there's one overall backstop, so this is according to the RT's correspondent in Brussels, one overall backstop, a UK-wide customs arrangement with deeper provisions for Northern Ireland customs and regulations, with a review mechanism included, and I gather Theresa May is calling her cabinet in tomorrow morning to agree on that. So we'll see how that does or doesn't make its way through the House of Commons. So there's an awful lot of questions there. So I might start with Senator Lombard. How prepared are we? I think as a nation, I think the government, so any people I talk to in the UK and officials that come over, they're astonished by the 4 big events that were hosted by Simon McConalogue. And astonished that the government has taken the time and effort to bring people together and try and spell out as much as they can. I think it's easier probably to do it in a country like Ireland than it is in the UK. My own sense is that we have been preparing for a deal rather than a no-deal situation, and I don't think as a country we have any plan B in place in the event of a crash out. So I'd be very worried about that piece. I think there's an awful lot of work been done around raising the awareness of it. I don't think we've begun to look at how we might help people deal with, just for instance, the customs implications of this. And I'll deal with the question that came up about how real a threat of a cost is that. So I think we're. So how prepared are our members? So we've kind of seen 3 or 4 things going on since the vote. In the immediate run-up to the vote and just after the vote, it was all around currency management. And that persisted until kind of about February last year. And around February last year, we began to get an awful lot of queries in around, I may now have to deal with customs. How do I deal with that? And customs has been the predominant thing for us, to the point we do an awful lot of training courses around customs and AEO and all of that. We have a big training programme around that. We put on a course in August thinking that it would be hardly filled. It was 4 times oversubscribed. So we ended up having to put on a number of them in September just to fill that backlog. So there's a huge demand for that at the moment. So currency, customs, and then this year has been about market diversification. How can companies get into and onto other markets? But the currency has crept in the last while, and we asked in our survey, at what point does your margin disappear in the UK? And if I can just dig it out from earlier on. Thanks. So we asked at what rate does the euro sterling exchange rate impact your company's margin in the UK, and about 42% of them have said between 90 and 95, which is not very far above where we are at the moment. And then another kind of 30% between 95 and 1. So that's quite worrying in relation to that. So, anecdotally, how prepared are our members? I think the bigger the company, so the foreign-owned multinational large companies would be a lot more prepared than Irish-owned large companies, than medium-sized, than smaller, than micro. So, less and less prepared as you go down through that. And I think one of the reasons is because if you look at our survey, there's a high awareness level of Brexit and its implications. I think a lot of smaller companies are time poor in being able to deal with this, whereas large globalised companies can put a team together in it. We asked, who's responsible for Brexit in your organisation. A lot of them have Brexit teams. Okay, so what was the question you asked? How prepared are we? Have the business community engaged with us? We're seeing increasing engagement all the time. I think certainly those 4 events that were the Getting Ireland Brexit Ready were very well received by certainly our members, and our members who went to it, certainly appreciated it. I think how is the UK? Is the UK doing the same thing? To my knowledge, no. How ready is the UK? I don't think they're very ready at all. I was speaking at a conference, a food, agriculture and farming conference in London last week, and I was quite shocked by what I saw and I heard at that conference. So you had some very senior people from the retail area, the producers, farming, and it was a day-long conference where there was a panel of 4 or 5 speakers from different parts of it, 40 minutes after 40 minutes after 40 minutes, and my abiding memory coming out the door was this notion of kind of keep calm and carry on. We're heading towards the cliff like lemons, but we will prevail, we will do. So I was quite shocked with that. I got a sense from the farming community over there, just listening to the speakers, that their sense is that they're less bothered about Brexit than maybe other people are, because when they come out of CAP and the UK government will provide subvention for them, they'll be able to farm whatever they want, and because they're going to do these fabulous trade deals all around the world, they'll be able to sell food all around the world. They weren't prepared to ask the question, what about the cheap food policy, and what does that do to undermine standards in that. And in no way, shape or form, when you look at regulatory equivalence or anything like that, is environmental standards or labour standards been put into it. The farming guys that were there are talking about a massive labour shortage on the fields over there to get stuff up out of the ground. Massive labour shortage on the ground over there. So you talked about, is there any potential positives out of this? I mean, to me, there's very little positives out of Brexit in any way, shape or form. I think it is forcing Irish companies, those companies that can, to look further afield and to diversify their markets. So it is doing that. But I don't see any positives really at a national economic level. I think it is making Ireland a much more attractive area, a country to locate in internationally, to retain access to the European Union. Certainly we're seeing signs of that. So I suppose the abiding message I'd like to leave you, Senator, is we've done a lot of work in creating awareness around it, but I think our action has been around a deal and not around a crash out. And I still think, despite what there is, I think there is still a grave danger of a crash out. Senator Daly, is there disarray in the UK going down to SMEs? I mentioned what I saw at this conference last week. When you talk to some of the companies, they're very divided. There's very few business leaders in the UK will actually stand up and say what they actually believe. So I think there's a huge lack of leadership within the UK, talking to government and trying to influence. They're terrified still of opening their mouths from a situation where in the Brexit referendum only very few of them got involved in that debate. I'm not aware of any kind of level of preparedness on a national level like we've had here. I'm not aware of that. The guys in the British Irish Chamber might have more about that. Sourcing raw materials and all of that. I think that's a big issue for Irish companies, a huge big issue. And it's not just about the tariffs, and it's not just about kind of customs procedures and the delay about that. We keep raising the point about import VAT. So once the UK becomes a third country, VAT will be imposed. VAT of 23% will be imposed on goods coming in from the UK at the point of entry. At the moment, there is a deferral. The revenue will give you a deferral to the next 15th of the whatever month. So if you happen to be bringing your goods in on the 16th, you get 29 days or 30 days. If you happen to be bringing them in on the 14th, you get a day. So other countries within the European Union have managed to get up to a 3-month delay. Greece has one, for instance. So there's no reason why we as a nation shouldn't be looking to do that. Now, what it means is it'll affect the government's cash flow, but it'll help the companies' cash flow. And you think about the number of small companies whose margin or whose cash flow could be potentially wiped out. Look at what happened with the mushroom farmers and that. 23% hit to their bottom line immediately. I think that's going to have a massive impact. Anecdotally, we are hearing stories about some European companies saying to their suppliers, you need to start looking at where you're buying your stuff from, and perhaps Ireland and the UK is not the best place to be getting it from. We are hearing that anecdotally. There's a set of EU contingency plans that have been published by the EU today, and there's only the detail of all of those are just beginning to work out now. What happens when we go off a cliff edge in terms of, is this thing going to come up? These bollards going to come up on the border? I don't think so, and unless there's time to put kind of infrastructure in place, I'm assuming trade will just continue to go on until all the stops and checks and that can be put in place. So is there going to be a dramatic stop to everything overnight? I'm not quite sure that the infrastructure is there, either in terms of physical infrastructure or personnel, to be able to do that. What I would say is that and there's a lot of talk about the Prime Minister in the UK saying that they're not going to put border infrastructure up, and a lot of people quoting that the Taoiseach has said exactly the same thing, so there'll be no physical border. So if there's no border there, and there's no border between Ireland and Great Britain, does that mean that the border then moves to the coast of France? Because, if the European Union is going to preserve the integrity of the single market, they will not want back, cheap food and, unregulated type of stuff coming in via Northern Ireland into the European Union. So where does that border end up being? Is it in France? Cliff Edge, I don't know what's going to happen in relation to that. Deputy Kenny.
Sorry, you mentioned there that some European countries are already advising companies to start sourcing elsewhere other than the UK and Ireland. You grouped Ireland with the UK.
Yeah.
Is that because of the land bridge, or we'll still be a member? We'll still.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's because of the land bridge, but I have had some anecdotal feedback that they've said, look, you need to examine your supply chain. You need to look at it you need to look at the Irish stuff, and you need to look at the UK stuff.
And they would be fellow EU members.
They would be fellow EU members, yeah. So that's not coming from the country. That's coming from the company. But that's anecdotal, and it's not on a massive scale. Just to say that to you. So on the land bridge. So on the land bridge, I think that AEO will be able to help a lot of transport on and off. We're not 100% sure for the food sector because our sense is that for livestock and animal product, the truck is going to be opened and will want to be opened. So the jury's out at the moment in terms of whether AEO will help with other matters. In terms of bonding and that, and having to pay money across and that. But is it going to be the solution for that? There's a number of issues with AEO, one of them being that if there's groupage, so if the foodstuff is within the same truck as other bits and pieces, then it may have a knock-on effect on other goods going back and forth across the border. You said, is there a model for no checks? I'm not aware of a model for no checks at the moment. There is talk that a truck will be sealed in somewhere within Ireland and reopened, and so there is issues around kind of security and that. So there is talk that you could seal a truck in Ireland, it would route through the UK and be opened in France or wherever it is. But and AEO really is most effective when the whole supply chain end to end has got AEO accreditation and certification. You talked about, and I think what you're trying to get to is customs declarations. Yeah. So there hasn't been a need to have customs declarations since Ireland went into the European Union. So that expertise is largely gone out of the country. Now, companies that are trading with other parts of the world outside the EU do have that knowledge. But I could certainly tell you the demand for our basic customs level courses is going through the roof, and where it was initially the people who were, I suppose, supply chain professionals that were coming to the courses, we're now seeing the finance managers of the companies beginning to come to those courses. So in 2016, I think it was 2016, there was 1.3 million customs declarations on and off the island. So, there 700,000 of them were import related, and 630,000, I think it was, were export related. That's expected to go up 10 times. So you have, now there is technology available to help with that, but there is a very low level of expertise, and they're being highly sought after at the moment. A lot of our members are telling us they're actively trying to recruit these people, and you have the government at the same time revenue is looking to recruit people, and it's exactly the same in the UK. So, you know, we're not going to be able to take them from there, or they're not going to be able to take them from here. There is a massive demand for that at the moment. And companies are actively engaged in contingency planning around that. So do they employ 1 or 2 experts on it and try and train a number of people up internally, or do they go and they buy that expertise in? So that is, so I think if we weren't talking about Brexit, we would be talking about the major competitive issues that exist in the economy at the moment anyway. But this is an added-on piece to it. So that's going to be a cost in terms of employing people, so employment cost, time delay potentially, and you know, I think that those people are going to become very expensive over time. So that is a big issue that's sitting out there at the moment. Are the UK out doing deals? Again, our friends in the British Irish Chamber might have more of a view on this than that. My sense is that there has been, there's been some initial conversations. That the one that seems to be the holy grail for them is a trade deal with the United States. And certainly at that conference I was at last week, that was the one that they really want to have. Is their biggest trading partner outside of the European Union. So that is being held out as the holy grail. And if you listen to what's coming out of the White House, they seem to be keen to do a trade deal with EU, with UK. So that seems to have moved on a bit. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to do trade deals than they might believe. It is, but there is very little awareness of the fact that it's going to be much more difficult for them to do these trade deals, and not even that. You know, if they're jeopardising, you know, their trading patterns are not an awful lot dissimilar to our own, in that the EU is their biggest trading partner. So if they're jeopardising that, to be able to replace that with trade coming out of Commonwealth countries, for want of a better word, it's nonsense. Like it's like, you know, at that conference, and I don't want, and I'm conscious of not naming names and things like that, but at that conference of that last week, I actually sat in the room and listened to fake news when somebody, you know, who was billed as a learned individual got up and talked about a specific issue, and it was just, you know, untrue. It was just untrue. And you're sitting in the room with these captains of industry, and it's just like astonishing over there that, you know, this stuff that is going on. Brexit mitigation, state aid. I'm not aware of any application for state aid at the moment around, a worst case scenario deal. I'm not aware of any of that, but I'm absolutely certain that companies will need assistance. I mentioned to you that as recently as last week, we were told by 3 of our members that the measures that they've put in place run out after 6 months. And these are reasonably sized companies. So that's the breathing space that they've bought themselves. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Gallagher.
Thank you, and I think there's probably going to be a certain amount of crossover with Simon's answers, but I think, and I'm going to start the reverse way. I'm going to start with Deputy Kenny and his questions, and work the other way around the room just for a bit of diversity. Insofar as the land bridge model, and whether or not we can have a situation where you can have product going, food and agri product going from Ireland straight through to the continent without checks. I think that certainly there are attempts to try and see, is there a way that can happen? But I think the problem is that at the moment we already have checks. We have sanitary and phytosanitary checks around particularly food of animal origin. They already exist, and I think it will be very difficult in the context of the single market and the rules that are in place at the moment to have a scenario where product leaves from Ireland and crosses the land bridge without any checks. I think that will be is hard to conceive at the moment. Now, that said, I am aware that in the pharmaceutical side of things, where you have to have batch release and release of products, and you have a qualified person who releases the product, there is some talk that in that scenario, product would be released either in Europe to come on a land bridge into Ireland, Ireland, and provided it doesn't stop and nothing happens to it in the course of that, that it would not need to be further released from the UK into Ireland. So certainly these issues are being addressed, and to try and find a way of facilitating trade and not putting unnecessary barriers in the way. But a scenario where there is no check, I think is going to be very difficult, and very difficult mainly for the reasons that Simon already stated, with regard to particularly with cross-border trade, and as you say, you're very familiar with that, based in Leitrim. The issue is that if there is, I suppose, any form of a cheap food policy in the UK, if they look to do these trade deals with South America, with Brazil, Argentina, with countries, third countries, or indeed the USA, where they have very different standards in terms of quality and safety than those that we have in the EU, that is the real risk. So if at the moment product moving freely through Europe, there are already checks on that, but they are reasonably limited. Where you have a scenario where there is a border and potentially product coming into the UK, I think there are going to have to be checks. It's a matter of where they are. But there will have to be checks, and one of those checks, the reason for that will be maintenance of single market rules around food safety and quality and standards. So, I think certainly our members would love a scenario where trade could continue exactly as it is, and that is what they have been looking for, a maintenance of the status quo. And if if the news today delivers that, that will be absolutely fantastic and very, very welcome. But certainly looking at the way things have been going, it looks like that trade without checks will be potentially an issue. Insofar as the UK and what are they going to do from a sufficiency perspective and from a sustainability perspective in feeding themselves post Brexit, there is no doubt that, as we know, they are not self-sufficient in food production. They produce, I think it is 60%, and they then are reliant on 40% of imports, a significant amount of which comes from Ireland. And I think that is something that is likely to continue, and certainly that our members very much want to continue. But they are going to be looking at, and as part of perhaps doing some of these trade deals, they are going to have to look at giving concessions to other countries. If they want to do a trade deal with the USA, usually in trade deals it comes down to the cows, so it's either meat or dairy that are the issues in terms of concluding trade deals. So if they're going to do a trade deal with the US, it is likely that as part of that, the US will be very much pushing for increased exports of beef and of other products. And as we know, there are issues in Europe around hormone beef fed with hormone feed, and also issues, as we're all aware of the chlorinated chicken. So these things are real issues, and they have been impediments in the past to the EU doing deals and trade deals and trade deals with the US. So I think that there is if they are adamant to go out and do these global trade deals, there are going to be issues around food, and I think that is where the potential weakness is in food coming into the UK, which then potentially can get onto the European market. Again, the custom voucher scheme that we have recommended, and it is exactly as Simon says, a situation where the vast majority of Irish companies have not had to consider customs for the last 40 years, and it is not that it is rocket science. It's that it is timely, it is paper filling, it is an administrative burden, and if you're margins are very tight and you already have a huge amount of paperwork to deal with, this is an added burden that really most companies, other than the very large ones, will be challenged with. And so we do think that there is a need to provide support for companies and for all companies to bring them up to speed on what will be required. And certainly the course has been run by the IEA. We're aware they have been very well attended. We've also run courses and seminars and breakfast seminars ourselves on this. And indeed we are aware that the state agencies are doing as much work as possible. But I think, you know, there is no doubt that understanding where your product is going and what potential tariffs will be applied to it is going to need people who understand the system and who can figure that out. So, you know, and that is going to lead to increased costs. There is no doubt about it. And I referred a moment ago to the pharmaceutical sector and QPs, qualified persons. We're certainly seeing, you know, now there is a shortage of suitably qualified persons in Ireland, and as a result, you know, their wages are going up. What they can demand, what they can look for, is increasing. So that, I suspect, as Simon has said, will become an issue around customs and that skill. And I think that is something that we need. You know, we really do need to focus on ensuring that those skills exist right throughout the chain. On the let me see, was there anything else there that I wanted to address? No, I think that you know, that covers, Deputy Kenny, most of the questions that you raised. And you know, I think if we look then, Senator Daly, to the, I'm sorry.
Just one query, if you like. You're saying that a lot of the small companies, both of you said a lot of the small companies don't have, if you like, the capacity to deal with this. Is there a potential there for something to happen on a collaborative basis, that there could be some scheme put in place that would assist those companies to be able to work together through some of these problems? Because obviously the problems are going to be uniform between all of them, but and the solutions probably are as well. Is there a possibility there which would be cost efficient for all of them, rather than each company having to find the expertise on its own, that the expertise could be shared some way between sets of companies? Or is there any initiative in respect of that?
I think there certainly is an opportunity for there to be collaboration, but I mean, you know, you get to a situation where a lot of it depends on your particular product line. What exactly is it? How does the tariff apply to that? You know, I was looking at something recently where we were looking at, as an example, shortbread. You know, somebody manufacturing shortbread and importing you know, maybe using Irish butter, but importing flour, importing sugar, bringing it in. Currently, that all happens and it's manufactured in the UK and then it's sent, you know, and shipped globally and around Europe, and there's no issue. Post-Brexit, if we're looking at a tariff scenario, there are going to be particular tariffs on each particular item and ingredient going in. You know, calculating that, doing all of that, is going to be quite specific to particular products. So I think where you're talking about perhaps, you know, a category which is uniform and where there is similar people, similar businesses in a particular area doing exactly the same thing, then there will be potentially room for that collaboration. But I think there, you know, there is also going to be a requirement for specifically skilled people in particular areas. But I agree. I think that, you know, in a scenario where it is possible to share out that expertise, that should be done. And I think, you know, through the LEOs and Enterprise Ireland and the various people on the ground, we are seeing some of that support. And I think that you know, that will be something where in the future we will have to look at that to share, because there just won't be enough of these skilled people to advise.
Please, yeah.
Just to add,
back in a minute.
Sorry to interrupt, but just to add, I think on the training side, I think to make support available to small companies to be able to avail of ours and other people's training scheme. So Intertrade have made vouchers available, which some of the people who attend our courses avail of. So I think that's a really good support. I think it's when you having a kind of a cooperative approach, because food is so specialised. It's a lot. It's quite difficult, I think. But I think maybe working with some of it's not something that we haven't considered before. With some of the logistics companies, is there a way of providing a service to some of these companies that might be locally based, but people's production runs are different, the type of stuff that they're putting in the back of the truck can be different. Is everything compliant in the same manner on it? I think it's very complex, and just in terms of the knowledge. I mean, the training that we actually do is we sit down with the companies and we go, here's your SAD. This is what you put in that box. This is what you put in that box. This is what you put in. It's literally, this is what, and that's what they actually need to know. And I think if support is made available to them, because there is customs brokers and things like that, so they can take on doing it themselves. They can farm it out, but somebody within the organisation at a minimum needs to know it. But I think that the volume is going to be so huge that for a company to try and bring it in house is probably not a bad idea.
Okay, Ms. Gallagher, I'll return to yourself there now if you want to keep continuing.
Okay, thank you. Senator Daly, you raised the question around particularly in the UK, around raw material supply and how prepared are Irish companies who are sourcing raw material in the UK. I think we have seen again and again, it comes to this issue of we have seen a number of our members that are larger, where they have got the resources to perhaps look at their supply chain and to be able to identify where their raw materials are coming from, and so they have done that, and they have perhaps scenario played out. Where could they source these raw materials alternatively to the UK, or what potentially will be the cost implication of continuing with those supplies. So a number of them have done that, and we're seeing certainly, I think, over the last number of weeks, and really since the summer, since the beginning of September, people are now really gearing up on this, looking at it, thinking about it, looking at their supply chain, but there is no doubt that there will be issues around supply chain and around raw material supply from the UK into Irish manufacturers. As I say, some of them are looking for alternative supplies here in Ireland, and indeed on the continent. But our concern would be that that will lead potentially to, as I say, increased cost. You also asked about contingency plans on the continent, and the fact that we have been doing some contingency planning here, and actually the government and indeed business and business organisations have been doing a lot of work here to prepare companies and to inform them as to what the challenges may be. The contingency plans on the continent, in what I have seen, and I think what we have seen in the British Irish Chamber, there are some, but they have other issues to be concerned with, and they're more focused on other issues. They're not as concerned because the UK is not as significant a market to them as it is to us. That said, again, I think that they are more focused in recent weeks as we get closer to the end game on this, as to how it might affect their own markets. And I think there is no doubt that, and I know that Simon referred to anecdotally to companies on the continent saying you need to be looking at where you're gathering and where you're sourcing your ingredients. I think there is no doubt that companies on the continent will be looking for opportunities. They will be looking to become more competitive, and so therefore they may well say, well, you know, we're going to source locally, and rather than sourcing from Ireland, UK. I think Borbia and the agencies are doing a lot of work to make sure that there is a very clear distinction between Irish product and UK product. But you know, I think their level of contingency planning around Brexit, particularly in the agri-food area, is significantly behind where we are here, and they're looking at it and aware of it, but not, I think, as prepared as we are. The other issue you raised is the issue around, are there opportunities? And I think, you know, unfortunately, we would love to say yes, that we're seeing that there are lots of opportunities. I think those opportunities are less obvious, but they do exist. And you asked whether the fact of our proximity and perhaps lower transport costs into the UK, even in a scenario where there are tariffs, does that mean that there are opportunities for Irish businesses and indeed for our UK members in proximity in selling into Ireland? Yes, I think that probably will give a slight competitive advantage in terms of other EU producers. But I think where we would see perhaps the opportunity would be in innovation, in making the Irish industry more competitive, and investing in innovation, and also potentially, you know, I think we have seen in the UK and you know, and I will come to their state of readiness and preparedness, but I think certainly there is no doubt that the UK is looking at, in a post-Brexit world, how does it become competitive on a global stage? And they will be looking, and indeed have produced papers about attracting in investment, both in the biopharma side, but also in innovative food and food supplements and all of those types of areas. And I think we will see that, you know, they will look to how do they become competitive, and this idea that they will be able to, you know, shed the regulatory chains of the EU and allow them to, you know, throw the kind of the rules out the door to allow people to operate in the UK, is certainly something that we have heard. Again, it's anecdotal, but we have heard it in that is what they are looking at behind closed doors. So I think that Ireland and Irish companies need to look at that and be in a position to compete and to use the proximity to the UK. Whilst, you know, we look at what's happening as a negative, we do need to see where those opportunities are, because we are going to continue to be feeding our friends and neighbours in the UK, and that is what we want to do. And we will also be reliant on imports from the UK. There is absolutely no doubt of that. And so, you know, having as close a relationship in a post-Brexit world as we possibly can is very much what our members are looking for. Senator Lombard, just to come to some of the questions which you raised, and I think this was a theme about how prepared are the UK, are they as prepared as we are? I think Simon has spoken about the conference that he spoke at last week. Our sense is certainly that they have not done, the British government has not done as much work as the Irish government has done in the area of planning for Brexit, and indeed planning for a no-deal Brexit. I'm going to ask my colleague Paul to speak a little bit about in terms of the loan and the government supports, but certainly in terms of a business scenario, we are seeing that a lot of our members in our Agri-Food Committee, whilst we have been talking about Brexit for the last 2 and a bit years, and we have been discussing supply chain issues, what should we be saying to yourselves as a committee, what should we be saying to government, how can we support the trade? we have seen perhaps on the UK side of things less engagement in that and perhaps less awareness of some of the issues. And as I say, that has changed over the last number of weeks. And indeed, speaking to one of our members just this morning, he was telling me that they are seeing now their big customers in the UK suddenly sending out questionnaires saying, what are your plans? How do you plan to deal with tariffs? How do you plan to make sure you can still supply us? So this is something that that really has not happened within the food sector up until the very recent past.
You said the penny is only beginning to drop now, which was a phrase.
I think so. I think so, that, you know, that there has been this approach that it'll be all right and things will sort themselves out. But as we get closer to the end of this, it seems that, you know, customers and the big retail customers and you know, in the UK are suddenly saying, actually, we need to think about this and maybe it won't be okay. So there is more engagement between trading partners than there has been. And again, you know, in my own day job, I have seen where on the pharma side and in other sectors that started a lot earlier than it did on the food side of things, and it's something that that the food companies in the UK and the retailers appear to be becoming more engaged with. But certainly I do not think that their level of preparedness is anywhere near where we are. And I think that there has been an approach that it will all work out and it'll be fine, it'll be all right on the night. But Paul Lynham, who is our head of sector, spends a considerable amount of time in the UK and engaging with both UK government and business. And if I may, I might ask Paul to perhaps...
I'll just take 2 minutes.
No problem.
Yeah, I'll just run through the differences. First of all, in relation to the Irish government, the original question, I think the stakeholder engagement has been exceptional, actually. From the Taoiseach stakeholder engagement he has quite regularly, to the Customs Consultative Forum, to the sector-by-sector Brexit stakeholder forums that took place after the referendum, and even the preparation in advance of Brexit, where the UK government didn't do any preparation in advance of Brexit. In terms of the supports the Irish government have made available, while there are quite a lot of them, I think they could be better and more wide-ranging. Our competitiveness as a business community generally could be improved more, and I don't think we may have got the full breadth of support in terms of the budget on that. But to give you an example of what would have been low take-up of the preparing for Brexit grants, they're limited only to EI clients. We think it should be more wide-ranging to get the whole chasm of businesses exporting and affected by Brexit. That being said, and obviously we've articulated the need for a customs voucher scheme to support businesses like the ones that go to the IEA for customs training. I think that's now essential rather than important. That being said, there's a day and night when it comes to the Irish preparation and the UK preparation. As I said, they didn't do any preparation in advance of Brexit. In any scenario planning, in terms of information, the most information they put out there is the no-deal papers. Of course, the information they give down to their businesses is based on perception that Brexit is actually a good thing. We don't have that in the political discourse in Ireland. There isn't any political parties that thinks, generally speaking, that Brexit is a good thing, and therefore we prepare for Brexit as a bad thing. So it's very difficult for them to propose supports for something they think is genuinely going to be positive. And that isn't uniform across the United Kingdom, because it's a devolved competence. Scottish and the Welsh administrations have given some supports and some information to their members, but practically nothing from the UK government, because it's based on a scenario that they think is going to be overall positive. Other points I'll add that says that AEO does quite a lot. It doesn't, as Simon articulated, it doesn't fully support the agri-food sector, but it's important to bear in mind that AEO and getting AEO status is not too long a process, but is an expensive process because of the detail that has to go into in terms of your supply chain. In terms of the work we have done already, we set up a ports and transit group between the UK and Irish ports and transit and freight sectors in terms of the knock-on effect that them not being prepared would impact on Irish businesses that are preparing as best they can. And again, significant differences. While the UK are only now looking at different scenarios of what Brexit may potentially mean, Irish port and transit sector is actually taking action. You look at the agricultural post being established at Rosslare Port to look at a diversification there to create different space for checks that eventually will happen if they leave the single market. That isn't happening in the UK side of things. They have no plan for Dover at all. For example, they are looking at how they can rearrange some of their landing sections in some of their ports, but it isn't taken to the next level at all. And I would think the timeline would be very tight for them to implement anything into the next stage as well.
And can I ask, sorry, Mr. Lambert, do you have much interaction with those particular companies that aren't in that particular space at the moment? Do they engage with you on a regular basis, or do you have to encourage them to go that extra mile?
For UK companies, is it?
Yeah.
Well, because of our membership generally, they're more engaged than not. It's when we do the wider sector by sector events where we open up to non-members, we have these stakeholder engagements, that's where we get the fuller idea of where a sector is at. So our next one, I think, will be in January. We'll bring together the ports and transit sector, where we'll have a clearer idea of what potential Brexit we are looking at. In terms of the UK deals, I think was referenced. Obviously, legally speaking, while they're in the EU Customs Union, they won't be legally signing any deals. They can sign deals then when they go into the transitionary period, but they can't implement it until after that period as well. From what we've heard is they haven't had the response that they're hoping for in terms of countries like India, Australia and of course America as well publicised, but I think they were hoping for more progress in India and Australia as well. That hasn't happened, and the Brexiteers are actually saying it's incredibly unlikely that they will have any of these international trade deals if they keep the common EU rulebook, because obviously they'll have to look at, America says if you're going to do a trade, Wilbur Ross actually said, we're good to our friends, we're happy, we want to do a trade deal with the United Kingdom, but it will be on our terms. If it's on American terms, that affects regulation and rules that the UK would implement, and therefore it would affect their relationship with the European Union and particularly Ireland going forward. Brexit Mitigation Fund, no, we don't envisage applying for it and establishing it now. We do think it is something that should happen with immediate effect post-Brexit, regardless of the Brexit that will happen, because Brexit is going to be a shock to the European Union as a whole, and it shouldn't be just one country or two countries going for state aid. It should be a general EU-wide response. The Committee of Regions, which is obviously local authorities, on a European Committee of Regions has recommended a regional support Brexit Mitigation Fund. We believe that that's a good step in the right direction, but it should be sector-by-sector basis as well. Irish agri-food will be the most exposed possibly of any sector in the European Union, but other sectors in other countries as well should also receive EU solidarity funding. It could be structured in the same way previously as the structural funds. I think I have covered most of anything that may not have been covered before. So I think...
Well, I suppose a slightly an added on note, if we could put it as such, when the vote was taken in June 2016, one of the short-term difficulties, obviously the sterling differential, had a huge knock-on effect. Is there an anticipation that that may be an issue again come the 1st of April?
Yeah.
I'm not asking to look at the crystal ball now, but...
So, if you look at sterling now, since the announcement, it's come down 70 cents. Sorry, 70p. It's come down against the euro, and I think when you look at the competitive advantage trading one way or the other between the two countries, you know, a weak pound has the ability to offset any of the customs and tariffs that might be so that the pound has moved 24% since November the 19th, I think it was, before the vote. But if you look at where euro sterling is historically over the last 10 years, I think the average is around 82 to 85p, so we're kind of at an average rate. And also, if you look at it over the last 20 years, it's at historically high levels. And if you removed the Brexit, if you remove Brexit out of the euro sterling rate at the moment, you would say that it's actually probably at a peak and it'll start to come off. So Brexit and the political risk is actually keeping it quite high. So does it come into play in April? Well, if there's a deal done, my sense is that the pound will strengthen. You'll see euro sterling coming off.
Like I think you referenced earlier on, when the vote was taken in June 16, the mushroom sector, for example, we lost a number of companies straight away. It was a huge negative effect. Now, the possibility of that happening again in another sector would be detrimental, obviously.
Hopefully we will learn lessons in terms of leveraging and spoken about before, and how people can do contracts in various different ways. I know that progress has been made in that area, but certainly if it's a positive outcome, as Simon says, expect the sterling to strengthen. If it's a negative outcome, go down again.
I think part of the complications with the mushroom sector was that they were operating on a very short cash flow of some. I think I heard about 6 weeks. I think the danger is that if there is a crash out, or there's a crash out, then the pound will disappear, and you then have a threat around substitution coming in here as well, where. Not only is the stuff that we sell in the UK suddenly more expensive, the stuff that the European Union is the stuff that the European Union, including ourselves, selling into the UK would be less competitive. But the UK selling into here, a movement in the exchange rate might negate any customs and tariffs on it. Okay. Just the last thing on that is we did ask the membership what percentage of their next 12 months sterling exposure is hedged, and there's about a quarter of them have 0% cover in place, and about another 20% have up to 25% of their exposure covered. So it's still quite low coverage. It's a bit higher than it was actually, but it's still quite low.
Quite low, yeah. Okay, thank you. Finished, Mr. Lynham? Okay. Any other questions, members, before we wrap up? I know I'm conscious Deputy Cahill is only after arriving there short. Haven't got any questions, Deputy?
Thank you.
Okay. There's no further questions. Thank you very much for coming forward to me today. As you know, this is a revolving issue and a moving issue on an hourly basis, and I'm sure we'll hear plenty about it over the next weeks, months, obviously. And we're obviously all very conscious of the end result of where it's going to go. Again, thank you very much for coming forward to the committee. We'll obviously, as I say, our paths will cross again as we progress through this. As there's no further business, the meeting stands adjourned until next Tuesday, the 20th of November at 3:30 p.m. Thank you very much.